Good morning. I am here on these continuing spotlights on local health heroes and resources. And I'm very excited to have Dr. David Berv, who is founder and owner of the Float Zone. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Vicki.
So I've been wanting to interview you for a while as a relative newcomer to Richmond. I love finding out these amazing resources. And I was so excited when I actually went to the float zone and tried a float. And I was so enamored of it that I actually, have your cards and brochures in my waiting room and recommend you to my clients all the time. But not everyone might be aware of floating and what that can do. So let's just start with a little bit of history. Um, David, what made you interested in floating and what got you started in all of this?
Well, it's interesting because during this quarantine period, I've done a lot of cleaning, and I came across my very first certificate that I got back in 1989 for polarity therapy. I became a polarity therapy and vibrational healer way back when, prior to chiropractic school. And had been doing dabbling in other healing arts even prior to 1989. I'm like, well, 31 years since I've been doing, since I've been doing healing. But yeah, so shortly after that, I went to chiropractic college and ended up going an additional year to become a sports chiropractor after that, for an additional year after the 4 years. I practiced for a lot of my career in chronic pain, ironically, as a chiropractor. And despite my specialties and despite helping people, I suffered quite a bit during my career. And it was in 2013, at the height of my career, when I had really developed quite a few specialties, that I thought I had a herniated disc, and I went in and found out I had multiple sclerosis. And so that really reshaped my whole vision of, like, what am I going to do now? The last 20 years of my life, I've been trying to get to a point where I'm like, okay, here I am. I'm this created all these specialties. I love helping people. I love doing what I'm doing. And now I have to, reshape my whole life. And it was during that crisis that I actually found float tanks. That I was visiting a brother in Colorado, and he's like, David, you're a mess. I need to take you for a float. And I said, what's a float? He took me to this center that had the same kind of 9-foot by 5-foot fiberglass tank that had a hinged lid on it. And there was 10 inches of skin temperature salt water in there. And I climbed in, and as a result of the super salty water, you're effortlessly buoyant, and the skin temperatures or the water's the same as your skin, and so you can't tell where your skin ends and the water begins. And floated for an hour, and I got out of that tank, and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I need to get one of these for my home to begin with. So
Well, what were you feeling? What made you say that was amazing?
what was amazing about the experience? Well, um, to have incredible fatigue and pain, and to feel cloudy headed, and to feel just generally yucky, and
Mm-hmm.
to walk in hunched over, and to get out of that tank after an hour and feel immediately different
Yeah.
in in body and mind. It was very impressionable. I mean, it was like, wow, I can think clearly. You know I'm not in pain. I feel light and bright. My feelings of doom are now serene. And so yeah, it was quite immediate and palpable. And from the lens of a musculoskeletal specialist, I realized this has some tremendous benefit to it. And I had never even heard about it before.
Right. So, as a doctor, I'm sure that led you to research the heck out of it and try to figure out, like, why, what is going on, and what did you find out?
Well, I found out um, that floating began in the 50s with a neuroscientist at the National Institutes of Health that was studying states of consciousness. And so he was doing various experiments and, kind of got on the fringe, studying with psychedelics and working with animals, working with dolphins, and in different environments, and that then there was other researchers at the time that kind of took over, and it became less. It became first. It was termed sensory deprivation at first, and I think that term was kind of scary for people, thinking about the war implications of that and what that means for, are we thinking about the movie Deer Hunter or something, or
Like solitary confinement.
it sounds like solitary confinement. So it wasn't, and so then new researchers coined the term REST, or restricted environmental sensory technique, or stimulus technique. And that led up, I mean, I'm kind of fast forwarding, but that led up to the 1980s, where we had the AIDS crisis. And it's interesting living in this COVID time, when many of us are old enough to remember the AIDS crisis back in the 80s very vividly, and the fear surrounding the transmission of disease through water. And it quickly decimated the industry.
Mm-hmm.
And so it went out of sight from the 80s and the 90s until really the early 2006-ish, and then during, maybe not as much in the UK and Australia, but certainly in the United States. And so that's really where a lot of the technology had begun to resurface, was in the UK, in Australia, and then in other foreign countries like Germany and Sweden.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, the technology kind of came to the United States in the early 2010s, but yet, as a result of it not, it kind of disappearing, a lot of the research also disappeared, or wasn't there. And so you go to search for research, and in 2018, 2014, 2013, 2014, you search for research, and you're seeing citations from 1991 and from 1994 and from 1987 and from even from 1954, whatever, from way earlier. And so you're saying, wow, this is really kind of a new thing that's resurfacing, that we're even seeing through the lack of published research. I mean, so there's been new researchers that have come on board. One namely in particular, a guy named Justin Feinstein at the Laureate Institute of Brain Research in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And so he's been very instrumental industry-wide and worldwide in helping to do clinically controlled, peer-reviewed studies that have been published and have really, helped the industry to survive and to thrive, and to encourage, new and other research to happen.
And what are these studies finding?
They're finding primarily that floating is wonderful for anxiety. That's the number one thing that they're finding for is anxiety, and that also finding that the same pathways that anxiety travels, pain travels. And so we're finding that the centers of the brain that deal with pain also deal with anxiety, and vice versa. And so you're able to help a lot of emotional side and physical side symptoms at the same time. And so you're finding that there's immediate and lasting benefit to the float, where you're reducing cortisol, where you're reducing adrenaline, and you're reducing the hormones of fear and of the sympathetic side of the nervous system. And you're finding that hormones of serenity are now being produced. The oxytocin, the serotonin, the dopamine are being increased, and you're seeing lower levels of cortisol being produced. And that also being studied right now is the absorption of magnesium. And there's so many benefits to to the absorption of the mineral magnesium too. And so we're seeing that as far as helping with muscle soreness and helping with pain and also helping with neurological and cardiovascular and many other benefits.
So is there magnesium in the float water?
There is 1,000 pounds of Epsom salt, otherwise known as magnesium sulfate, in the water. And so we dissolve 20 50-pound bags of this Epsom salt or these magnesium salts, and they're called salts, but it's really it's a chemical composition, or we call it a solution. It's not really like table salt, so it's more of a chemical description of it. But yeah, so you have 175 gallons of water and 1,000 pounds, half a ton of salt in there, and so yeah, there's a lot of magnesium in the water that's that's being partly being absorbed through your skin.
I don't think I even knew that, but I regularly prescribe Epsom salt baths to my chronic pain and injured patients because we know that when magnesium enters our motor cells, it actually gets them to relax and unclench, and also really good for spasms, things like that. So what you described, David, it sounds like it would be ideal for chronic pain patients and people who have autoimmune disease because, um, as you mentioned, stress and anxiety become so interlinked with just the disease itself that it in itself helps to perpetuate the disease symptoms, right?
Absolutely. And so, you need to break the cycle somehow. And a lot of times you get, whether it's, looping thoughts or looping feelings, or, that, that, that you get this fear avoidance behavior of, hey, I don't want to exercise because if I exercise, then I'm going to be in pain. And then if I'm in pain, whatever, or, sometimes you get crappy sleeps and you don't know how to break that cycle. And so that's the other thing, actually, as a wonderful side effect of floating, is better sleep too. So, by getting the better sleep, you help everything, because then you get to reset the brain and kind of snip off those unnecessary synapses that are continuing to repeat those same cycles. So yeah, it's a nice reset in many different ways.
Yeah, great. I wish I had asked if you could produce a photo of one of these float pods. Do you have one handy?
If I can produce a photo of it, let me see. Uh,
Yeah, but while you're looking, I say this because a lot of people don't know what to expect. Yes.
so yeah, you can see on my phone. Uh,
Yeah, it's
so yeah, it's a fiberglass tank with a hinged lid, and you can leave the lid open or closed. You have
mhm.
light controls inside there. You have music controls inside there. So we have like ambient music that plays, although you can choose a variety of different music, and we even have guided meditations that you can listen to underwater, and that's like meditation on steroids when you're doing any kind of meditation, while while removing gravity, while removing a lot of the senses. But personally, I shut the light off, shut the music off, shut the lid. But some people, especially when you're first doing it for the first time, you don't know what to expect. So there's ways to customize your comfort. But yeah, that's what it looks like.
Right. I just didn't want people to think that they were going to be walking into some like cold, dark, empty chamber, and but it's actually bright. It obviously looks very much like an egg, and there are cool lights. And it's actually very inviting. You've set up a really nice transition from the front door to the float experience itself, which I hope to emulate in my clinic. It's a very seamless. And then one of my favorite things is you have at the end of your float a Zen out room that's full of books or tea or just a very inviting space where people can just keep the relaxation going before they re-enter the real world.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, it was a very purposeful flow and setup. My wife and I visited probably 15 different float centers prior to opening up all over the United States. We traveled to see, look, and feel and flow and equipment. And, and of course, we had already had an interdisciplinary center for the previous 20 years. And so we had a similar look and feel anyway there. So we kind of had a sense of what we wanted to have there. But yeah, so we keep the people walking in the door away from those people that just floated, so we have an initial sort of waiting area, reception area when you walk in that's comfortable. But then once you complete your experience, yes, we have a post-float lounge where we have, brain waves that you can listen to that are frequencies that play a little bit differently in one ear than the other ear that help to balance off hemispheres of the brain and kind of keep that same feeling going. And other coloring books, et cetera. But yeah, it's a nice place to process the experience instead of heading back out again. A nice place to anchor the experience after a deeply relaxing and sometimes it's even kind of disorienting experience to be with nothingness for an hour. And you had mentioned the light before, and that we have all the different colors of the spectrum that, so if you're like, hey, can you turn the green light on for me, or can you turn the red light on for me? And it just reminded me that, after abruptly going from, 20 years of clinical chiropractic into being a spa owner was a quite a shift for me. And so I still had and still have that clinical side of me that wants to kind of give back in that way. And so I often go in and talk to people after their floats, and hey, how was your float? How did you find out about us? Why are you floating, et cetera? And it wasn't but weeks after we opened a little over 4 years ago, that I had talked to this one woman that had floated because she has a traumatic brain injury, and her boyfriend thought, oh, maybe this would be good for you to recover from your brain injury. And I said, without really thinking, here I am, one shoulder's going, well, don't get distracted, you need to be marketing. The other shoulder says, hey, do you want to do a case study? And so I began to do case studies, and this one traumatic brain injury case study turned into 6 traumatic brain injury case studies that turned into chronic headache case studies, chronic low back pain case studies, chronic neck pain case studies, opioid recovery case studies. I did multiple sclerosis and autism and Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and I've done about 20 or so different clinical case studies now, involving sometimes individual case studies, and up to maybe 12, 14 people at a time, going through month-long to 6 months long programs demonstrating, and they would have daily charts to fill out with different parameters of their symptoms so that I could track them for a period of time. And even after the study was over, I followed them for a month after to see the residual benefits of it. And remarkable that in every single study, from traumatic brain injury to neck pain to, university college students that I did a sleep study, across the board, anxiety, depression, stress, sleep, pain, focus, energy levels are all improved, and with lasting benefit too. And the more cumulatively that you do it, the more regularly that you do it, the more benefit that you see and the longer that it stays.
I was going to ask you how often these people were floating.
Yeah, well, when you say these people, so if we're talking about the case study, it was either once a week or twice a week were the subject studies. And so, I divided people into different subject groups, where, where I noticed that the people that floated twice a week benefited more initially, but over the long term, when I say long term, say 8 weeks long, um, the 1 week and 2 weeks had very similar results. And then following up after, a month out, in many cases, the gains were still there to 60%, 70% of the gains that they had made over that course of that 1 month to 2 months. But just generally speaking, when you say, well, how often does someone float? I think you as a clinician knows that everyone's different as individuals, and you come from a different place, and you harbor stress and anxiety and depression differently than other people. You may be in a different pain situation. I mean, there's sometimes, I have chronic pain too, and but I'm not in a 8 out of 10 every day. Some days I am. Some days I am, and I go in and float, and it takes me, 30 minutes to relax before I can actually get into the float. And then I get out of that float and I feel wonderful. I still, after so many years, I still float weekly. So there's people that have chronic conditions like myself, whether it's MS or chronic pain, or, that float regularly. But there's also people like myself that incorporate other things into their lifestyle, whether it's yoga, acupuncture, meditation, breath work, and which would necessitate perhaps floating less because you've now incorporated all these other great wellness techniques into your lifestyle. But there's people that come in that say, hey, I like this better than getting massage, so they choose to integrate that, instead of, or in addition to. So maybe they were getting massage once a week, but now they float once weekly, and then they get massage the other week or whatever. But it's different for everyone. I think it's situational too. Some people are going through a grieving process, or going through an acute pain process. Some people, because of my background as a sports chiropractor and my specialty in sports, we see a lot of athletes that come in too that are training for things. And so there's a lot of, from recreational to professional athletes that come in before a race, while they're training, while they're ramping up their training. And so here's a marathon runner, that's going from 5 miles to 14 miles, in a 2-week period, and they're all sore. And this helps to reduce their recovery period, and they can train harder.
Right. Um, David, a lot of healing modalities, or holistic or alternative medicine, have, as you would, come from a particular cultural root. So you can talk about yoga coming from India, acupuncture and Chinese herbs obviously coming from China, etc. Does floating have any sort of cultural precedent?
I don't know. Did Buddha float?
I don't know.
I mean, you think about some of the Greek temples and some of the, I mean, yeah, I think that, look at the Dead Sea. I think there's been, whether you want to call the medicinal properties of floating in the Dead Sea, the history of that, maybe they weren't even looking at it as, medicine back then. But yeah, for sure. I think things probably, in the Middle East in particular, in that area where you have that super salty water, I think people have been using that for millennia. But but I mean, in our, I don't even know how to answer that from our westernized culture. It's like, okay, well, antibiotics weren't even around for 100 years ago, so this is all pretty new in terms of a technique or a modality. But
Mm-hmm.
floating in salt water has been around for a long time.
You're right. There's those hot springs with, sometimes sulfur pools, or salt pools. There's people who float in the Dead Sea. There are, I just remember when I was reading a lot of European literature classics growing up, and I was always taken by the description of people who would, like, when they were unwell, would be sent to these sanatoriums, um, where they would take the waters. And I always thought, take the waters, that sounds so intriguing to me, but I'm sure some of it had to do with, obviously, the hydrotherapy.
Right. Right.
Um, and I also, I love, I have to state the obvious that the whole experience seems a little bit like a return to the womb, which in itself psychologically, mentally makes you think, oh, this is a place I'm going to feel safe. This is a place where I can just return to this primal state of being, not being. And is that discussed, or is that intentional?
Yeah, a lot of people say that. In fact, we have a lot of pregnant women that float during their pregnancy, throughout their whole pregnancy, up until, days before they deliver. And a lot of it also because for obvious reasons, the body changes, especially in that third trimester. It's hard to sleep, you get uncomfortable, can't be on your belly, can't be on your back, can't be on your side, and you can find in this weightless position, you can get that relief for an hour, but then that also kind of improves your sleep and improves your comfort, but above and beyond pregnant women, a lot of people have noticed and state that same sentiment that you just said, that sort of comforting womb-like feeling. And yeah, I'm not sure if it was necessarily intentional in that way, as far as more functional, that instead of climbing into some little closet, that have the room to move in there. But
Hmm.
um, I guess it does have an aerodynamic design to it too, so I guess if you put wheels on it, it could no.
That would be great. A mobile float
Yeah,
center that comes to you.
there you go.
I think we just hit on the future here. Um, so that is a great idea for the pregnancy, and I hope that that's something that you actually market to people, because I get women throughout various stages of pregnancy, but invariably the third trimester, it's all about just being uncomfortable in your own skin, right? And there's like the
Yeah, yeah,
muscular, and also, yeah, because their bodies start releasing oxytocin, which helps to relax the muscles and ligaments, so that you could have this giant thing come out of like your body. And in that way, it's almost like having growing pains again, where you're kind of achy. And a lot of women get carpal tunnel and all of this because they get a little bit too loose, and they're still working as much as they used to, because in our culture, people work till the very end, and it was not
yeah,
always the case.
yeah. And even, getting back, the magnesium is anti-inflammatory too, and so that's what's nice about things like carpal tunnel syndrome during pregnancy, when you're swelled up, and that helps with the swelling too.
Yes.
But I did want to just mention that, along with these case studies that I've been doing, one thing that really came to light was the fact that floating seems to work best in tandem with other modalities like acupuncture, and like cupping, and like massage, and like physical therapy. And I think that it leverages everything else by really helping to, and I don't mean to talk in scientific terms, but down regulating that sympathetic nervous system, or keeping the knocking those cortisol levels down lower, and keeping that inflammation down, helps other modalities do their jobs better.
Right.
So I think that I have tremendous respect for what you do and the acupuncture that you do, and I think that that's a great example of something in tandem that works really well, when you kind of incorporate that type of teamwork. into your healing practices.
I agree, and especially after treatment, say someone lives or works in a really stressful environment or lifestyle. I can't go home with them and keep giving them acupuncture, but they can go to a place like the float zone and just give themselves that break that they need. I'm always annoyed that they named it the sympathetic nervous system because it makes it sound like it's nice.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, I tell my patients I'm running from the tiger, right?
Right.
So when you're running from the tiger, the last thing on your mind, your agenda is digestion, sleep, just everything's designed to like damage control, right?
Yeah, it's funny because when you get out of the float experience, immediately you're hungry because you've just you've gone into that rest and digest mode, and you're like, why am I so hungry? Or or it stimulates, while you're in there, you're like, oh, all these digestive noises, and
Mhm.
so
And for
it,
people who complain that, oh, they can't lose weight or suddenly they're putting on weight, if it's that stuff that goes around your middle, often that's stress weight. Because when you're running from the tiger, your body's like, you know what? I really can't get to this digestion thing right now. So we're just going to pack it away somewhere until we have time to do it. Right?
yeah, I was wondering about that. I thought it was the ice cream that I was eating.
Well, hey, we're in a pandemic. Talk about stress mode, right? And we're looking for comfort food, but we're just like not digesting it properly. Um, so I, when I first had my float, just being who I am, like uber curious, I'm the kind who's asking way too many questions all the time. I got into the float tank and I was just, for the first maybe 20 minutes, just like, ooh, what's this light? What's that light? Like maybe I'll have the lid open, maybe I'll have it closed. Do I want it dark? What kind of music? So it took me a good 20 minutes to just settle down. And then once I did, and finally really experienced it the way it was meant to be experienced, all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, it felt like 5 minutes and I, I was done. So that made me really hungry to go back again, knowing, being more familiar with what to expect and experience. And so, it could take more than just one time. So I just want people to keep that in mind.
For sure. I think it's like with many things, even acupuncture too. Sometimes you don't feel the miracles after the first acupuncture treatment. It takes a couple times to really notice. Sometimes when you're in more distress, you notice things more. But you're more normal than you think as far as feeling that what you did that first float. I mean, when's the last time that you removed most or all the senses around you, including gravity? And really, we tell people try 3 floats, because the first float is really novel. You're floating effortlessly, you're bouncing around, you as you said, do I want the light on, off, do I want the music on, off? um, and then the second time, you know what to expect, and you can kind of slide in easier to the relaxation mode. Maybe you try a different time of day, a different day of week. Maybe the first time you tried it was 10 o'clock in the morning, like right now, and you're more, your normal cortisol levels are up, and you're awake and alert, and that's not maybe the best time, but maybe 4 o'clock on a Friday at the end of the week is your sweet spot. Then after doing it a couple times, you realize, maybe I can set an intention here and say, well, I think this is how I'm going to incorporate floating into my world. I'm looking to really increase my mindfulness, or I'm in a I'm training, like I said, for something, or I'm hurting, whatever. But yeah, it definitely takes a couple times.
And even with acupuncture, when we're talking about chronic pain, some people do have that miracle after that first visit. I mean, it does happen, just like you experienced with your first float. But for a lot of people, they just have so much things going on systemically, like diabetes or MS or et cetera, or Lyme disease, that it might take a little longer for their bodies to respond because what I do for chronic pain is we're doing neuromodulation. It's basically their sympathetic nervous system has been so jacked up for so long that anything is can be construed as noxious stimuli and just trigger ow, 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 ow from the brain. So our work in the beginning is really just calming down that overreaction, and then we can get to the good stuff to eradicate some of the cause, right?
I also think it depends how you enter the healing experience too. So if you're on your way to a float and you're drinking that 16-ounce cup of coffee and you just took a B vitamin, and then have just come from the gym and your heart's racing, and then you go try to go and just shut off for an hour, that's going to be a hard float for you, and you're not going to enjoy it. Whereas, someone goes in and drinks that 16-ounce cup of coffee, and then you say, "Well, your pulses are bounding." You're like, and it's not necessarily a constitutional state as much of something that you did to disrupt it through food or drugs. And it's, some people are on medication too that come in and they've just taken their asthma inhaler, and you're like, seriously, like, you just jazzed yourself up, right before you went in. But or many of us are on medications that can alter our state no matter what during the day anyway. And especially, I remember during my chiropractic days too, that I'm trying to help someone in pain, and they're taking a steroid,
Mhm.
or they're on a fentanyl pain patch or something, and they're like, well, I don't know if the chiropractic's really helping. And it's like, well, you know, anyway,
You're
I'm not
taking
gonna
all these-
I'm not gonna go there, but
I know, but they're taking all these blockers, which, yeah, they think it helps, but really it's just masking the pain. And at some point, those things are going to run out of juice. And then
or,
where are you going to go from there?
yeah, or people are so reliant, or it's such an overpowering response from the pharmaceutical that people often associate, well, I had an acupuncture treatment. What, that's not having the same effect as the steroid.
Right.
It doesn't work like that. So I think it's the same thing with floating too. You really have to look at it from a different perspective, which is why it's often a cumulative thing.
Yeah. And what you were saying before about people showing up with the big gulp coffees and stuff, I mean, I really don't mind the term holistic medicine. Some people think, oh, that's just a way to marginalize us. But the whole meaning for me is that, yeah, we're looking at how people are eating and sleeping and working and just living, because it really, you can't just divorce that from the symptoms or the conditions that they're seeing you from. And I, lay down the law. I'm like, of course I'm not laying down the law, but I do advise people not to drink coffee 12 hours before a treatment, because the caffeine molecules compete for the same pain receptors, as so you're basically um, at opposite intentions of what the acupuncture is trying to do, or the float zone and the magnesium is trying to do. So if you want more bang for your buck, then help us help you. Right.
Right. And I also think just your general sort of state of mind coming into the session too. We're all in such a, hopefully this pandemic will get us to kind of maybe think more mindfully about our lives and the way in which we are, it's so fast paced all the time. But you know I always find it funny as well when people are in a rush and they've just been in traffic and they don't leave time for themselves to arrive early. And so your appointment's at 2 o'clock and you get there at 2:02, and then you have to use the bathroom, and then you do and then you're in and then your heart's still at 110 beats a minute. And then instead of like, this is, I'm sure the same thing too. It's like, give your give yourself the permission to kind of like slow down a little bit and use that as part of your treatment to show up even a little early for
That's
your appointment.
We went over, but I just have such a good time geeking out with fellow, practitioners and healers and modalities, and just learning all about all these rich resources in Richmond, and highlighting what might seem unfamiliar to a lot of people. But I have to ask you, signing off, you're closed right now. Is that correct? For
We
the
are we are presently closed. We'll be open to the public in a couple weeks. We're just getting our cleaning procedures and protocols down. I mean, we already, in many ways go overkill as far as how we clean the place anyway and keep it sanitary. But yeah, we're taking the extra measures, and so we will be open very soon.
That's great. And any words of advice on how people can self-care until you reopen?
Get outside, breathe the air, get in the woods, smile, get some sunlight, um, and think happy thoughts because you have a choice.
Very nice. Thank you, David. It's been so much fun, and I would love to do more interviews, maybe even talking about different conditions and cases and all of that, if you're willing.
So,
But I'm so appreciative that you spent this morning with me.
well, feelings mutual. Thank you very much, and have a great week.
You too.
All
Bye-bye.
right, bye.